let's talk about ghouls. Hello everyone, it's me, Turbo Owl, Ethan, all that stuff. And it's been a hot minute since the last time I actually recorded anything on this channel. There's a very good reason for that. I had genuinely just forgotten about it. I must have just kept putting off whatever my next planned video was, and then I looked up and 2 years had passed. Anyway, someone recently reminded me that this channel actually exists, and I fortunately still have the means to log into the thing. So, decided I might as well give a try to recording some more stuff over here, because recently I've been talking a lot about Vampire the Masquerade in my Discord, so now I want to talk about Vampire the Masquerade. However, I'm a bit out of practice. I'd need to do some reading to get back to those long clan videos. So today, I'm going to go a bit easy on myself, and I'm going to talk about ghouls. It's going to be a very simple overview of what ghouls are, and discussing kind of why a vampire might have one, how a ghoul actually functions, and the moral peculiarities surrounding the creation and maintaining of a ghoul. I will warn you that this is going to be very specifically talking about Vampire the Masquerade V20. I don't know what changes may have come by Vampire the Masquerade V5. I've not played V5 yet. I'm still kind of avoiding it, to be honest. I don't know anything about how the laws changed in V5, except for the fact that the Camarilla is still around, but nowhere near as important as it used to be. That's basically all I know. But yeah, so we are talking specifically about V5, and of course this is a kind of a broad overview of ghouls, and not only that, World of Darkness, it is worth noting, does contradict itself quite frequently, partially by design, because the setting is very much of the opinion that there is no canon except for what the GM says at that given time, so some of this may never come up, and as ever, if you're listening to this, don't try to use this to countermand something that your GM says if you're in a game, because the GM is always right about the nature of the setting, because you're never playing in an objective setting, you're playing in their version of the setting. So, let's get into it. So, at the end of the day, in the most basic terms, in World of Darkness, what is a ghoul? To put it as simply as possible, a ghoul is a mortal creature, a living creature, that has been fed some amount of vampire blood. That's basically all it is. Ghouls can be more or less any form of living creature. They are most often humans, but they can be animals as well. I've never heard of... Actually, I was going to say I've never heard of an insect ghoul, but that is an outright lie. There was explicitly in one of the Vampire the Masquerade campaigns I played a guy called the Bee Guy, who was a gangrel of some description, who kept, like, swarms of ghouled wasps and bees. He was genuinely kind of terrifying. But yeah, that's what it is. It's a living creature that has been fed a diet of vampire blood. Now, you may be wondering what that does, what it is exactly, other than the fact that they've drank vampire blood, what is it that actually separates a ghoul from a non-ghouled version of that creature? And I'll tell you. Unlike what you might expect from the word ghoul, ghouls are in no way undead in World of Darkness. They are still very much alive, and as such, are still very much vulnerable to relatively standard ways of being injured and maimed, unlike vampires that can take a shotgun and keep going. That being said, however, ghouls are generally stronger and faster than their non-ghouled counterparts. They are kind of, they're a bit below the level of the lowest level of vampire, but they are certainly better than the baseline of their species. Also, I am going to be looking over here. I've got some notes to try to keep me from wandering too far off and to remind me what I'm talking about. Animals and humans do have some differences in terms of what being ghouled typically does to them. Animals, for example, typically get larger and also smarter when they become ghouls. It's not uncommon to see like giant dogs and animals that have a very specific kind of uncanny intelligence, not necessarily the ability to understand, not necessarily human level intelligence, but definitely smarter than you might necessarily expect. This is honestly what makes a lot of animal ghouls quite useful, and for the clans that, not just vampires who have acquired this through other means, have, I believe it's animalism, that allows them to commune with and communicate with animals, it can be quite useful. It's also worth noting that ghouled animals will generally lose their inherent fear of vampires. this is presumably because they're now tainted by vampires. There's some vampire in them, so they tend to not have the same immediate kind of negative response that a lot of animals will have to some vampires. Although even then, there are many reasons for a vampire to not get some kind of negative response. If memory serves, animals don't always react incredibly badly to vampires. If memory serves, they tend to just be a bit weird about them unless you've got a specific negative trait or something that means that the animal specifically reacts very badly to you. But even then, ghouls, they don't care. It's also worth noting that both human and animal ghouls stop aging. I'm not sure if there's an upper limit to that. I know that I have never heard of an upper limit for how long they can stop aging. However, it is worth noting that the aging, the end of aging, the aging is only halted as long as they remain a ghoul. Ghouling is not a permanent process. It's something that has to be continually restarted, something that needs to be continually fed. Essentially, if a ghoul runs out of vampire blood, if they stop receiving their regular dose of vampire blood, they will revert to a normal human or animal state. It is worth noting, however, that, as I say, the aging stopping it's less actually stopping and more just pausing. Because, unfortunately for a ghoul, if they... Okay, let's take... A lot of people who care about Vampire the Masquerade have probably played Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Let's take Mercurio. Mercurio says in the game, if I remember correctly, I'm almost 60, when he looks like he's in his kind of, I'm going to say 30s. If he were to stop getting vampire blood, which, to be fair, if you go with several of the endings in which LaCroix ends up fucking murked, there's a solid chance he will end up having to go without vampire blood. He will begin aging very rapidly until his body catches up. As I said, it's paused, it's not stopped. The age is there, it's just waiting for you. In extreme cases, when a ghoul has lived beyond the normal lifespan of a human being, or, if they're an animal, their natural lifespan, if they suddenly lose access to vampire blood, they can basically, like, Invaders of the Lost Ark, the whole face melting, skeletizing, that will happen to them. It's not a pretty sight, and it will happen very quickly. It is worth noting, however, that it doesn't have to be their specific master's blood. They can basically feed off of any vampire blood. In fact, if memory serves, there are cases in the lore in which vampires have died and their ghouls have just started working for other vampires, getting passed around. In fact, there are some clans that have essentially entire family lines of ghouls who work alongside them. Okay, so that's basically what a ghoul is. It's a human or an animal, a living creature that is required to drink it drinks vampire blood, and in return, and as a result of drinking vampire blood, they become stronger, they become faster. In the cases of animals, they become larger and more intelligent. They also actually gain a very limited amount of access to vampire disciplines. I believe it's only the first dot they can get, and that is a hard maximum. And even then, in the cases of, it has the restrictions of learning, disciplines from anyone. Namely, if it's something like potence or celerity, they can just do that, because that's basically just pushing your body. But if it's something more complicated, like Tremere Thaumaturgy, while they can learn the first dot of that, they do need to be taught. But that's all they are. They're basically almost like half vampires. They get the very low end of being a vampire. However, they don't actually have any of the drawbacks that you would associate with being a vampire. Sunlight, they don't care. Stakes. Well, stake to the heart will kill anyone, but it's not especially dangerous to them. They don't have the limitations that vampires have. Pretty good life, it sounds like, on the top of it. So, the question then becomes, why would you create a ghoul if you're a vampire? What does the vampire get out of it? In the case of animals, in a lot of cases, it could literally be a matter of a pet for companionship, to make certain that a pet is more likely to basically stand your presence and is more likely to survive the rigors of living in the night in World of Darkness. And another matter is, essentially, ghouls can be used as servants or bodyguards or foot soldiers to get your shit done during the day. One of the issues that vampires will often face, especially it's something that I think should come up if you're running a game or if you're playing a game, especially when you're playing recently turned vampires, are just vampires that have had any kind of life as a human, or have any kind of public-facing interactions with anyone. Having people who can operate for you during the day is incredibly useful. It is very, very good, especially because there are cases where you can literally, you could arguably use a ghoul to kill another vampire during the day by just sending that ghoul to their house. Ghouls are a very useful thing, very good tool. You will often find that you will have, again, case in point in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, you meet several ghouls who are essentially messengers, go-betweens, servants, and helpers for their vampiric masters. That's the main reason why you have a ghoul. It's worth noting that there are some weird kinds of ghouls that are kind of outliers that I'm not going to be discussing in here because they are typically connected to certain clans. An example for that would be the Chemise ghouls, which I will talk about when I get around to eventually making a clan video on the Chemise, those being the Vojd and the Schlachter. They are specific weird kinds of ghouls created by the Chemise that don't follow the same rules as normal ghouls, because of Chemise flesh crafting and Coldonic sorcery. Schlachter, although, may, in a lot of cases, still actually more or less be normal ghouls that have just been flesh crafted. Vojd, however, I think I'm saying that correctly, I think it's Vojd, are their own beast, and they are very rare and very hard to make. They're also known as war ghouls. They're almost like flesh golems. They're kind of nightmarish. Okay, so actually, I believe... if you want to know how fucked Chemise ghouls can get, again, using Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines as an example, the fucking things, basically all of the shit that you fight in the warrens and in the sewers are ghouls. That's what they are. Those little fucking potato guys running around on their hands, ghouls. Those, like, giant fucking things, like undead-looking things with multiple bodies and torsos, those are, like, Vojd. I believe that it's basically the big ones are extreme examples of Vojd, and the little fuckers on their hands are extreme examples of Schlachter. The bigger fat dudes almost look like Nurgle demons. Those I'm not sure what they'd be. They could honestly go either way. I'd lean more towards Vojd because they could do some wild shit that normal ghouls wouldn't be able to do. That goes beyond just their body shape being fucked. But yeah, I'm not going to talk about... weird Chemise ghouls and other kind of weird ghouls, because I'll talk about them when I eventually get around to talking about those individual clans. But yeah, it is quite common for them to be, bodyguard servants, foot soldiers. It's also worth noting that generally, actually, the creation of ghouls, as long as you're not taking the piss, will not constitute a breach of the Masquerade. Ghouls are more or less... Again, that's another thing. They're an easy way for a vampire to interact with the mortal world without risking breaching the Masquerade. Because a ghoul can operate in daytime and can have a private life, can have a personal life, can have a normal life in the eyes of the world at large that a vampire can't have, because you can't go out during the fucking day. I'm only now realising, years after the fact, that I really should have had a ghoul acting as Mastiff during the day when I was playing Mastiff. If you don't know who Mastiff is, there's an earlier video about a Malkavian I played, who was a celebrity, and I just realised that it was very silly of me to not have the guy who represented Mastiff in the waking world be a ghoul, rather than just a random guy, and I'm genuinely surprised the GM never made that bite me in the ass. But yeah, that's why you'd have a ghoul. They're very useful. Now, the counterpoint to that is, why would you become a ghoul if you were the human in this situation? The animals, obviously, probably not having much of a say in the matter. But the human, why would you become a ghoul? Well, the biggest reason is a vampire tells you to, and if you believe that's a vampire and you know what vampires can do, and to be honest, the vampire's probably going to try and impress you about that, you're probably going to realise you can't really say no to the vampire. Another thing is, quite honestly, is just pointing out all the things that they get. A vampire doesn't necessarily have to scare a ghoul into compliance, because, to be honest, if I didn't know what I know about World of Darkness, and I was in that setting, and a vampire showed up and they could prove they were a vampire and basically said, hey, here's, you know, a shot at, like, never getting old. You can be faster, stronger than any other human, and hey, you can kind of do low levels of magic. All you have to do is drink this blood, which to a ghoul tastes fucking great, and, do some jobs for me. Solid chance, I'd say yes, especially because, again, if you're working for an influential vampire, I mean, look at where MacLeod lives. Like, he lives in he's got a really fucking nice apartment. If you're working for an influential vampire, chances are you're going to be living in the lap of luxury as well, or you're going to certainly be comfortable at the very least. You're just going to probably be spending your nights doing some dangerous shit. So there's many reasons why you'd become a ghoul. Many reasons you could be convinced. You could be threatened, or you could literally be fed blood by a vampire without really knowing. This being the case of Heather in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. She became a ghoul without either the player character really intending for it, or the person having any idea what was going on. Now, it's worth noting, and this is the last point I'm going to make. As I said, this is short, it's very broad discussions of ghouls. Ghouls are a bit of a moral peculiarity, and there's something which I think it could be fun to explore the morality of if you're in a game. For the simple reason that, well, in a lot of cases, ghouls tend to be kind of hand-waved away. It's very common, if you've played Vampire the Masquerade, you know this, that the impact that kindred have on humans is typically kind of hand-waved away. Going out and hunting, that's always abstracted out in almost every case. You just do a roll and then you get your blood points. You never really drill down into what it's actually involved in that. Ghouls are kind of an example of that, where there's a lot of fucked up shit going on with ghouls morally. But in a lot of cases, that's just kind of swept under the rug because ghouls are part of the fantasy of the setting. But ghouls are deeply creepy as a thing, if you think about them for more than a second. And it's for one very important reason, and that is the blood bond. Now, I'm almost certain, I haven't fucking gone back through my videos and I can't remember all of them because, it's been 2 years. But I must have mentioned blood bonding, at least at one point. If I haven't, or just to kind of, re-explain in case you don't know what blood bonding is, I will explain. Blood bonding is a term used to describe a very specific effect that kindred blood, that vampire blood, has on anything that consumes it, including other vampires. It's why, in blood bonding, the act of deliberately feeding another vampire your blood, in the Camarilla, it's not necessarily a crime, but it's considered gross and weird. In the Tremere, they do magical rituals to basically force blood bonding onto every member of the Tremere, but weird blood bonding, where they're not blood bonded to another person or to each other, but blood bonded to the idea of the clan Tremere. And in the Sabbat, blood bonding is incredibly common. In fact, when a new Sabbat pack is formed, they are deliberately all blood bound to each other as an effort to induce more loyalty among what is essentially an evil group of fuckwits. But blood bonding, to put it very simply, is an increasingly strong emotional connection that is caused by drinking the blood of a vampire. Not necessarily of another vampire, as I say. Anything that drinks vampire blood can get bonded. Unless they have, there are like traits in the game that can stop you from being blood bonded. One of which is genuinely a nightmare for the Tremere. Again, I'm pretty sure I dimly recall playing, I think it was a very short-lived Vampire the Masquerade campaign in which one of the members of the group was a Tremere who was not blood bonded to the Tremere, but was so wrapped up in the propaganda he never noticed, and the guys in charge never noticed because he just did whatever they said anyway, which is a interesting way to use that trait, or not use that trait, I guess. But I guess that means you can just trust that he's actually 100% on board because there's no manipulation required. Blood bonding essentially comes in 3 stages. The first stage is kind of an emotional imperative rather than a bond. It drives you towards the person that blood bonded you. It gives you kind of an emotional attachment to them. It heightens what emotions you had towards them to begin with. It essentially fascinates you with them. You become mildly obsessed with them. Now, that obsession at this point can also be hateful. You know, it can be you can't stand them, and it just makes that more extreme. But, you know, one drink of blood, and you if you don't already have a push towards them, an emotional bond, it will create an emotional bond for you to the person whose blood you drank. It's one of the things that makes Diablerie kind of weird. Because if you try and do it in too many goes, you're probably going to end up weirdly attached to the person you're actively trying to eat the soul of. It's an odd one. But yeah, one drink, you get this kind of emotional imperative to seek out and to be drawn towards the person who blood bonded you. At the kind of second level of blood bonding, that emotional imperative becomes kind of strong, kind of unsettlingly strong. It will tend towards, much more strongly, it will tend towards a positive bond. Essentially, you know, in some cases, you kind of start to fall in love with them. In some cases, which is, you know, that's how it's represented with Heather Poe and VTMB. In some cases, you just develop a sense of extreme loyalty towards them. And in some cases, you know, you're just compelled to kind of be around them and follow their instructions. This is... Yeah, I'll get to that. And then at the third point, the third level of a blood bond, you are effectively enslaved by the blood bonder. By the time of the third level, your will is not your own where this person is concerned. This person, it is possible if you are strong-willed enough to shake off or to resist the demands or the desires or just the general desire to please and to serve the person you are blood bonded to, but it is very difficult. And for most people, you are effectively a slave to the person who has blood bonded you. A willing slave. Now this, when it comes to ghouls, is combined with the fact that for humans, beyond the requirement to drink vampire blood if you get beyond a certain age as a ghoul to avoid basically turning to dust, vampire blood is separately just addictive in and of itself. So that, combined with the blood bond, means that, effectively, because ghouls are required to consistently drink vampire blood, and chances are their only reliable contact within vampire society is going to be you. In a lot of cases, ghouls will more or less only know their master. Chances are that they are just a slave, and effectively a they're effectively a drug-addicted slave to their master, which makes the morality of ghouls really fucked. Again, using Heather Poe from VTMB as an example, I'd argue the only good thing, the only morally right choice in that situation is give her blood that first time when you find her in the hospital, and then let her go. Don't take her in. The moment you take her in, the moment you let her drink your blood again, you've enslaved her at that point. Ghouls are slavery. But they're kind of creepier. Maybe it's just me, but I find the fact that they seem willing to do it creepier than if they were being intimidated into serving. Because at the very least, if someone is being forced to do something, to act as a slave, at the very least their will still exists. But being a ghoul effectively robs a human of their agency, and they become basically this altered version of themselves whose primary goal, second to, like, above all of their former goals, desires, wants, dreams, hopes, their primary goal becomes serving and pleasing their master. They will still have a personality, they will still have their own wants and desires, but those wants and desires will be thrown directly into the fucking toilet if their master says so. And sometimes, even if the master doesn't say so, because they are so chained to their master that they want nothing more than to please them. Again, I'm using VTMB as an example for this, but to be honest, for a lot of basic concepts in Vampire the Masquerade as a setting. VTMB is a good introduction. You can see this exactly with Heather Poe. Even though the player in that game doesn't really use her for anything, she willingly, without necessarily being prompted, drops out of school, gives up on her career, cuts ties with her family, and gives you every dollar she has. You don't necessarily ask her to do it. I mean, you have an option, but even if you don't ask her to do it, she does it anyway. Because she is utterly smitten with you against her own will, because you are essentially mind controlling her passively, to the point at which she has no real authentic desires. She's not really making informed choices. Ghouls can't make informed choices. They can't really give consent to anything, because by definition, they are under an incredibly powerful psychological, mystical influence that means that they won't say no to anything you ask of them after Blood Bond level 3. And while a vampire can break a Blood Bond level 3 with a great deal of resistance, a ghoul almost certainly won't. Yeah, they're a grim thing. They're a very grim thing. I generally don't use ghouls when I'm playing Vampire the Masquerade. I mean, but then the question is morally... No, morally there's no real difference. I'm thinking about the moral comparison between having a human ghoul and having an animal ghoul. But an animal ghoul is effectively a superpowered pet. I mean, you'd have to consider normal pets to be immoral, to consider a ghoul pet immoral, because we essentially use psychological tricks to train animals into loving us, so it's just another means of that. But they also aren't humans and don't have a will in the same way that humans do. Yeah, ghouls are just, they're really weird, and I think there's something that can be interesting if it's actively examined. Especially if you're playing a party that's trying to be good guys, who are actually trying to stick to the path of humanity. Ghouls should be something that I think should probably be examined by a party. And again, that's something I can't remember. I can quickly check, but I don't think VTM, V20, humanity. I don't even think... I'm not sure how humanity... How it's like hierarchy of sins... Yeah, I don't think it's hierarchy of sins explicitly mention ghouling someone. Yeah, no, it doesn't. So arguably, according to the game, I'd say beyond 7, beyond Humanity 7, you could just have a ghoul. Because the game doesn't explicitly say you can't. But I think it's something that it can be very fun to examine as a party. But again, only if you're playing characters who at least in some way are trying to stay good. If you're playing like Sabat, no, it's pointless because the Sabat are evil fucking murder hobos anyway, it doesn't matter. But if you're trying to play, good characters or people who are trying to hold on to their humanity, trying to remain at least somewhat decent, examining the moral difficulties around ghouls could be quite interesting. There is more to ghouls than I've mentioned, but then again, there's more to every subject that I've mentioned of Vampire the Masquerade, because Vampire the Masquerade is an incredibly dense and complicated and weird and contradictory and fascinating tangled web of a setting. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, if there's still anyone watching this channel. I may do some more. I do want to talk about the Shemise clan. Because I talked about the Malkavians, and then I said I didn't want to do the Shemise, because they're my, the Malkavians and the Shemise are my two favourite clans. But then I think, I don't even know what clan I was going to talk about, but whatever clan it was, I clearly just kept putting it off, because I didn't want to talk about them immediately. And then I stopped doing videos. So if I do another video in the near future, it will be talking about Clan Shemise. However, this is going to require me to do a bit of reading to double check some stuff. I somehow managed to keep talking for about half an hour for this anyway, so hopefully I've still got the ability to talk ramblingly, but hopefully interestingly, on this subject for a while. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I can't remember how I do the outro on these, so yeah. Bye.